Can you check that? Yeah, just lock the door behind him when he leaves. He's dropping off my keys. All right, guys, we are live to the best of our knowledge on YouTube tonight. And we've got Captain Danny Garino going to be our guest. We're going to give this a few minutes, guys. We're going to be sharing a link here shortly to the YouTube feed where you should be able to comment, post, interact with us as we've got things going. So we're just going to give that a few minutes to set up, so just hang tight. We're going to be talking some of the new FWC regulations that have just been released and local fishing reports. So just kind of hang in there while we figure all this out, if you don't mind. Got everybody commenting on our other page here. Yeah, something's going on with Facebook, guys, where its security settings aren't letting us post, and for the most part, we're just fishing guides, not technical gurus, so we're having a hard time getting around all that. But we are working on it, and we should have our normal feed up by next week. So we're waiting on Jason. He's going to be sharing the link here pretty soon through a live video on the Facebook side of things.
Where are you at on Facebook now?
I'm on Tampa Fishing Outfitters Live Fishing Report page.
Okay.
I'm trying. I know. We are live. Getting it all running. Trying, man. Yeah, we're live here. So now I've got it up on YouTube live.
I'm sitting here trying.
That's what it was. Tired of hearing about trout. But we actually have some educational stuff that Capt is going to do for y'all tonight. Like I said, here's the link again. In the link to go to share this link.
Are you posting that on a normal page?
I'm doing it. See, look right here. The link is right there for YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
Facebook Live.
Cool. Tell them I'm going to post it just in a regular post as well.
We're going to put it in a regular post as well. But are you doing the show right now?
Yeah, we are. We're just going to give them a minute to catch up.
Just random.
It's all good.
I could sing, but I don't think you won't have anybody left. Okay.
Danny's tip of the week: don't ruin a rum Diet Coke.
I should have brought my rum.
But anyhow, guys, that's the.
Oh yeah, I think it's working.
No, I'm telling you, I've got the link. It's definitely working. Somebody click on that link. Let me know that we're live, even though Danny's just sitting there on his phone.
Yeah, I don't know where the heck I'm even looking at. I don't even see y'all.
The whole 9 people watching right now. Here's the problem right here, guys. That's the problem. They always have software updates. See, we're posting. Anyways, guys, check us out on the YouTube links. Like our page while you're there. Follow us, whatever it is on YouTube. We actually need to build our YouTube page, so help us out. We need help. Tune over. We're going to be coming at you live. Okay, are we good? Check, check, check. We're good, fellas. We are live on YouTube.
Live on YouTube.
Sorry for all the...
So some people made it over. We've got at least 5 or 6 watching now. So we'll give it, I don't know if you want to give it a few minutes for some people to catch up.
To figure out YouTube anyways. Maybe this is just a blessing in disguise.
Yeah.
really
I don't know
good.
if this is a blessing in disguise. Like, I definitely wouldn't call it that.
We got this thing running halfway though.
No,
James ain't feeling it.
I'm feeling it.
Anyhow, guys, you're listening to Tampa Fishing Outfitters Fishing Report. Captain Jason, Captain James Beers. We had some technical stuff go wrong.
And we the fill-in IT guy tonight.
Yeah,
The normal
hey,
IT guy.
You got it. You did. Hey, the replacements. Captain Danny,
That's me.
old friend of mine.
Yeah,
Still
man.
hanging in there. The voice of reason.
The voice of reason. I like that.
The
I'm not
voice
sure
of
I'm the
reason.
voice of reason right now.
Captain Danny, I asked him to come in tonight because he was one of the few people that made his way. Where was that meeting at? The trout meeting.
It was actually as a suburb of Tallahassee. It was this place called Havana, Georgia.
Okay.
So it's like 20 minutes from the Georgia line, I think. But
Wow.
it
That was a
weird.
drive.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was.
Well,
Good drive.
You made the venture up there night before, stayed in a hotel, and you got up on there and you did a little speech on recommendations as per the Florida Guides Association, and you gathered what they said and the process. And so I figured, let's bring you in. We'll talk a little fishing, and we'll also talk about the process on what actually went down since there wasn't a ton of people there from our area. To kind of educate people on where they come up with these and where the closure came from. Because I'll be honest with you, I was surprised on the actual trout closure. I thought we were looking at bag reductions. But
And Jason, there were two things on the FWC agenda. The first up on the agenda was the actual continuation or the discussion on the closure because of the red tide for snook and redfish and trout. And what they did with the trout this time is, remember back, I think it was a while back, maybe it was February, in the southwest region, there was a no take on anything over 20 inches.
Right.
Okay, so they knew trout was in trouble at that point. And at this meeting, they had made the decision to go ahead and add trout to the closed species in the southwest region. No take on trout. It's catch and release only, and that's both for commercial and recreational.
Mm-hmm.
So Jason, give me the finger to hold up. So
go
okay.
with it. Go with it.
All right. So I'm gonna read something real quick here, and this I mean these are the science that some of the science or the results of some of the science that the FWC came up with, and I can't show you the chart, but it has Tampa Bay, Sarasota Bay, and Charlotte Harbor, and it has for adult trout. It's a compared to the last several years, what the numbers of adult trout in those areas are. And in Tampa Bay, the adult trout was below.
Mm-hmm.
Sarasota Bay is below, and Charlotte Harbor is below.
So all three.
All three were below what the average had been for the last 4 years.
And what time frame is this from?
This was June of 2018 through February 2019 compared to the long-term average abundance.
Okay.
Okay, so it goes back several years on the average, but this is 2018, 2019. So for adult trout in all three of those areas, Tampa Bay, Sarasota Bay, and Charlotte Harbor, they were below average. The juvenile trout were in Tampa Bay comparable to the
Previous years.
Previous years, but Sarasota Bay and Charlotte Harbor, they were low.
Okay.
They're below average. And I'm going to read some of the verbiage here. It says that adult sea trout abundance in Tampa Bay and Sarasota Bay was already low prior to the red tide event. Current declines in abundance in Charlotte Harbor may be related to impacts from red tide. In Tampa Bay, adult abundance has been below the long-term average for the past 4 years. Juvenile abundance has been comparable for the long-term average for the past 4 years and has been increasing for the past 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And that pretty much goes with what I've been saying.
So it sounds like there was already kind of a negative trend?
It's kind of a negative trend, but I don't think it was that bad until the red tide came along. Now in Sarasota Bay, fisheries independent monitoring data from June 2018 through February 2019 indicate the lowest adult abundance on record.
So basically, no big trout.
It's on record.
That's on the adult trout specifically.
Not going down, but that
Right.
was the lowest
And I
abundance of sampling. And since sampling began in 2009, that's when that sampling began. Following a 3-year declining trend. Now it was declining already.
Mhm.
Then we had the red tide, and now it's the lowest on record.
well,
And
but these stats are prior to. They don't even have the stats together for red
this,
tide.
I think this
It
part
l-
of it is.
It,
in the
it
red
does
tide.
sound like because it's going up
Yeah.
to February of this year.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the
This-
so
this-
the
this
study
part of-
concluded
This
February.
part of it does
Okay.
include this, and I'll get to where we're going, because
Mhm.
remember there were two things on trout. One was for the closure of snook trout and redfish because of the red tide, and then there were some bag limit things that were in a completely other agenda, and that's what we talked about
Okay.
from the Florida Guides. Now, and I'm going to finish it. In Charlotte Harbor data from June 2018 through 2019 showed the lowest adult abundance on record and the lowest juvenile abundance on record following 3 years of poor recruitment.
Mm-hmm.
So Tampa Bay is probably in decent shape compared to Sarasota Bay, Charlotte Harbor. It's been places south of the Skyway, let's say.
Which makes sense. I mean, given how red tide
Given how the red
impact,
tide was and how the algae bloom came out
Right.
and all of the impacts we had there. So FWC made the decision. I think they made the decision to close it even before the meeting was started.
right.
So Florida Guides chose not to comment on that part of it because we're okay with the closure, and we
Right.
actually said that in our recommendations for the bag limit
Mhm.
changes. But to close the season for trout for 1 year, to let it recover, is the absolute right decision,
Sure.
in my opinion. There's a lot of people in Tampa Bay that are giving some grief about it because, and I understand, it's their prerogative. They're out there catching some trout.
Yes.
You know, there's no question about it. There's trout. There's live trout in Tampa. There's live trout in Sarasota Bay, even though the red tide was there. But to close it was the right answer, to give that species a time to regroup.
Sure.
Now, a lot of argument that I've heard these arguments back and forth on either on Facebook or some kind of social media, emails or telephone calls to my house, which I'm really beginning to enjoy.
Yeah.
Well, why can't we just keep it open in Tampa Bay?
It's
And
not manageable.
It's not manageable. But the other thing is that all of a sudden, everybody that wants to keep a trout from Sarasota Bay
Sure.
is going to come up and put undue pressure on the stock that's actually left in Tampa Bay.
That even without that factor is already receiving undue
Yeah.
pressure. I mean, if
Right.
you just look at the number of anglers
Yeah,
that are
just-
out there
just-
week to week,
Yeah, just the normal pressure
Right.
is outrageous anymore.
Right, and I think that's where the trend was going, where the bag limit was positioned for a reduction.
Yeah,
in the beginning, I think that's just simple math. That if the number of anglers going to target fish increase, then the number of fish we can allow
Right,
a population to keep have to decrease. You know.
So,
Eric, I somewhat agree with you. I have a theory. Me and Danny talked about this on trout.
So he's asking. He didn't think a year will be enough.
It depends on the species. So you have to remember, trout reproduce.
You know,
lot.
In 2004, we had a red tide event.
It was
And-
bad.
and it was pretty
remember
bad
that
in Tampa Bay.
Mhm.
It actually in 3 years, trout was back to above normal status.
Yeah.
So, is it going to take time? I think it will take at least 1 year. And I'm going to share some other good news here in a few minutes. But I think it's going to take at least 1 year, and the FWC is going to review it again sometime next year.
And keep in mind how many of those trout are going to cross that 20-inch finish line
Yeah.
and say, God, I made it. You know, I
Yeah.
made it past
Yeah.
that 20-inch. I'm safe. I know they don't know that, but that's the reality. So
Right.
Well,
in 1 year, a lot of those fish can pass that.
Here's some good news. If you look at the same thing that we did with snook in this same study, and I'm going to pull that up because again, remember, snook and redfish are closed also,
Yep.
and they're going to remain closed at least through the fall. Snook will
Mhm.
at least through the fall, but in every area, Sarasota Bay, Tampa Bay, Charlotte Harbor.
Mm-hmm.
Snook are thriving is the wrong word.
Mm-hmm.
They are doing well.
Yes.
There's no question about
Trending well.
They're
for
trending well. I'm going to find that chart here.
Well, Danny, snook are doing well, but if I remember
and
correctly,
the adult snook abundance trends, the adults in Tampa Bay are higher, Sarasota Bay are higher, Charlotte Harbor are higher.
So where?
They brought that up in the meeting.
Right.
And because the recommendation, actually they had already made the change to the law that they were going to keep it closed through May of next year. And there was some voiced opinions there, and mine was one of them. If they're doing so well in all three areas, would it be possible to open the snook season up next year for the spring season?
Mm-hmm.
And only because everything is doing well. And the answer is that's a very good possibility.
Okay.
They brought the scientists up, they spoke more, and they said, yes, we can look at it. So I got a feeling that the FWC is going to look at it in January of next year, February of next year, and make a determination if they can open up snook. I don't know that they'll do that with the redfish, because redfish aren't doing as well. Redfish haven't been doing as well, as far as I'm concerned, way before the red tide.
Right.
They started declining a long time ago. So
what do you think? What's your opinion on the declines of redfish in the last few years? You think it has anything to do with snook closure or the snook issue in 2010?
No, and I'll tell you what. I had a conversation with a friend of mine last night, and we disagree on the rules and the regulations. And he was a charter captain here for a long time. Moved away, came back. He and his son are now back chartering.
Yeah.
And he brought up a good point. The salinity in Tampa Bay, and he's an old-time Tampa Bay fisherman. I've been here for 65 years. And we talked about it, and he brought something up. He said the water quality in Tampa Bay is exceptionally good.
Mm-hmm.
It's clear water. You run down the South Shore area from the Skyway all the way up to the Little Manatee River.
Yeah.
And at times you think you're down in the Keys because the water quality is so good.
Yeah.
Which is telling us the salinity levels are higher. Those redfish, those baby redfish that we're not seeing in the Little Manatee River and along Tampa Bay, we're not seeing those little what we call rat reds.
Mm-hmm.
They need that fresh water. They need that lower salinity to thrive.
Yeah.
So that made a lot of good sense to me last night that the salinity levels are higher. And maybe the redfish are looking for something other than that. If you look at Louisiana, I mean, you got the Mississippi River dumping into Louisiana.
Yeah, they have. Yeah.
So, I mean, you got tons and tons of fresh water coming in there. And you look at Tampa Bay, we got a desal plant. We've got reduced water flow coming out of all of the Hillsborough River, the Alafire River, the Little Manatee River. Not so much the Little Manatee, but even the Manatee River. And we got pumping stations up there. We've got thousands and thousands of more people moving in using the water. So we're not dumping that fresh water back into the bay like we used to.
Mm-hmm.
It makes good sense. Now,
does.
I don't have any science behind it.
It's a good theory.
Yeah, but it would be something worth looking at. So
one thing that's hard to ignore is I just and this is. And Danny, you have the ton, more experience than you could add up at our table when we're usually all four of us are here. But what I've noted, or what I let me just call it a theory, and something I see is when you're making your way throughout the bay, and you're looking at a grass flat or a typical area that we found big pods of redfish in the past. If you look now, a lot of people fishing on those flats, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I've always known redfish to be such that they like to be on those flats, and they like to get in big groups, and they like to move up and down and kind of parade themselves and move in big groups. And it just doesn't seem to me like that's a feasible option for them anymore to behave like it seems like they've always wanted to since growing up here. That maybe they just found new grounds,
You're going to get into an area where Jason and I will disagree.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, I'm all for that.
I grew up fishing the South Shore.
Uh-huh.
I mean, since I was 6 years old, I was going out of Shell Point with my dad, and I mean, we'd come from Tampa with a kicker and rent a skiff.
Right.
We used to see, I'm going to tell you, hundreds, thousands of redfish
Mm-hmm.
on the flats. You know what we didn't see? I'd go out on a Saturday and you'd see one boat,
Right.
and they were running the same type of skiff we were running, a little,
Mm-hmm.
you know, 5-6 horsepower kicker that you bought from Montgomery Ward's.
Yeah.
We weren't running 40 miles an hour up and down the flats.
Yeah.
That's changed.
Yeah.
And the amount of people on the flats now have changed.
Right.
So it's what fish are there have been moved.
Right. They can't do what comes natural to them in Tampa.
Right.
You know, I just remember growing up, and even 10 years ago, there was pressure, but not nearly like there is today.
God, no.
Not nearly like there is today. And
I don't know how our industry supports. I don't know the fishery supports our industry at times.
Right. So I think
It's-
we just might need to curb our expectations on what the red fishery is nowadays, because I think we compare it to then, and you know, we're probably not with as many people go out and fish. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It is the reality one way or another. But what I just don't see how a school of redfish in the numbers that we're probably thinking of, if we all look back into our past and remember the last time I got on a really big school of redfish or consistently, how's that even possible for those redfish to behave like that on a fly anymore? Probably
There's
not.
too much
It's probably
pressure.
not. And you know, on the South Shore, especially the South, I can talk about the South Shore. I've been to Weeden Island. There's a lot of pressure on Weeden Island. I don't see on Weeden Island people running up and down 40 miles
They
an
don't.
hour.
There's too many boats. There's just it's
And-
not possible.
But on the South Shore, any given day, somebody's running that flat
Sure.
all day,
Mm-hmm.
nonstop.
I mean, I would agree with you on it. I think the fish are changing their patterns. The South Shore's had schools of reds since I can remember, but they've always been different than, let's say, Weeden Island or Tarpon Key. They're not super consistent. They're there, gone. They're gone. They move around a lot more.
But what I'm telling you is, before you fished, before you were alive,
Yeah, you might be right. Oh, I'm sure it was
they
different.
were there.
I'm
They
sure
were
it was different. I remember going, down south, and there was a school that would sit. That same school gets there, but they don't sit anymore. I remember when we found them as a kid, you would not move, and now you catch two, and you got to chase them because they're constantly
You
on
can't
the.
keep up on the
And
trawl.
Jason,
Yeah.
the other day you found probably a small school of redfish right by my house. You were in an area where nobody hardly ever goes.
Right. Yeah. And they still wouldn't eat.
They still wouldn't eat. I
Yeah.
mean, eating
Small. I'm talking
eating-
like 20 fish.
20 fish. But what we've learned, and what I've learned, and what I've been putting together for the last 8-10 years is that if you want to redfish on the South Shore, go for a place where there's no boats in.
I would say that's what I found to be true in the last few years of Tampa Bay. You know, I
And-
move
and
around
the
a
whole
lot,
bay-
and
Well, our hatchery fish, though, are down. I mean, you don't even
Yeah,
catch them
but
in the
that-
river, which isn't affected by. I mean, Danny, we used to
Yeah,
go in the
but-
river with shrimp and catch 30 redfish easy, small
you-
ones.
Yeah, small ones, and those are what's missing right now, and that's why we think that's why when our conversation last night
Yeah.
led to the salinity things.
yeah, I don't.
Now,
I just don't
there's
know.
There's other theory. We tossed around a bunch of stuff last night. We had a big oil spill how many years ago?
Yeah,
Where do those breeder redfish come from?
they're out there.
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you that Billy Nobles told me, offshore guy, last year during the red tide, we're talking about somehow or another, we're at the marker getting bait, and he was saying that there was a massive herd of redfish just all dead offshore, about
Yeah.
20, 30
Well, and
miles.
that was the other
that's-
thing. That red tide was here when those big redfish,
Yeah.
when those
I
big
I know
During the
redfish
break.
it was
to
a
come in.
collision.
Yeah.
It was a
So-
collision.
So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things. Maybe it's
Mhm.
everything. I don't know, but I don't see that particular species regrouping in the next 2 years.
Right.
Right now, me personally, I think the snook will. I feel certain the trout will, because
Mhm.
I'm going to share some other numbers with you right now.
Yeah.
What we did comment on, the FWC had made recommendations for bag limit changes that were they were actually going to vote on it in this meeting, and
Was kind of or we kind of heard about through social
that's
media
what,
leading
social
up
media
to it.
was doing that,
Mhm.
and Florida Guides put out some stuff. Wanted some comment from different people, and I got a lot of good comments from people.
Right.
I didn't get enough to draw conclusions. I made some phone calls. I got some emails from people. I went and called some of the old timers that I know that don't participate anymore and got some of their feedback. So we came up with some general consensus, and then I passed some recommendations along to the FWC board so to get their approvals on it before we published anything. But the FWC was going to reduce bag limits in a number of areas all over the state. And they were going to go in the northwest region, reduce from 5 to 3 fish. In the southwest region, 4 to 3 fish. The northeast region from 6 to 5 fish, and southeast from 4 to 2 fish. Not knowing at the time when we started this that the FWC was actually going to include trout in the closure of Tampa Bay, we looked at this and said, you know what, that's probably not a bad idea for the short term, is to go off and reduce the bag limits. So we were in agreement with the reduced bag limits. I will tell you now that if I have to go back and do this, knowing a little bit more now and knowing that they are closing the season, I wouldn't agree with bag limit changes, I don't think, in Southwest region, and here's why. The Southwest region, prior to the red tide and just after the red tide event, was thriving with trout, according to the science. What's being reported was not necessarily matching what the science was. So there's a question there as to why aren't people catching a lot of trout. And a lot of the data that I believe, and I'm speculating here. Some of that data, the data is when they do a species assessment or a trout assessment, that's over a number of years. It could be 5, 6, 7 years. So all of those good years were in there, and all of a sudden we got red tide.
The event.
We had the event. Now, Tampa Bay was exceeding their expectations. Not Tampa Bay, the Southwest, the whole Southwest region was exceeding their expectations. So with that science, I would suggest, and let's take the red tide out of the equation right now. Just based on that science, I would not support
the closure.
I would not support the reduction.
Right.
Yeah.
The reduction in bag limits based on the science. We supported the closure because of the red tide, and we would also support the reduction in here of the
for the same reason.
For the same reason,
Right.
for the red tide. When they come now, FWC made no changes to the bag limit. The other thing is too in here.
They basically hit a pause button.
Yeah, they hit a pause button, and because there was some opposition, not from this area.
Yeah.
Not from Florida Guys are the only people that came up and spoke to the whole state. I was number 22 of 23 people to speak to the bag limit. 22 of those people came from
Panhandle.
the Panhandle, the Northwest region.
I bet.
So, and before we put all of this stuff together, we talked to the people in the Northwest region, and they had a valid concern. And I'm really impressed with what we came up with. We started looking, and I said, well, tell me, because I talked to a guy in Steenhatchee. He said, Danny, the trout are just going crazy. It doesn't match the science because they're actually going down, but the trout is going crazy. And he told me, we're all lumped in. The Northwest region goes from like Tarpon Springs all the way to Pensacola.
Sure.
So we're talking on the phone.
A little bigger than the Southwest.
And I said, well, wait a minute. From west of Apalachicola, it's nothing but sandy beach. You don't have a lot of trout west of, no matter what.
Yeah.
And I said, from Apalachicola south to Tarpon Springs is one big grass flat. So you got plenty of habitat, and you weren't affected by the red tide. So we made a suggestion, and we included the Florida Guides Association in their proposal or in their recommendations, suggested for the FWC to re-look at the boundaries in the Northwest region. either let's make a new region or let's make an exception and look at least from Apalachicola where the trout habitat is. And we weren't the only ones that made that recommendation. There were some other guides that were up there, a guy named Pat McGriff, and I forget all the other ones up there. But they were all ready to shoot me because we were going to support it. And so our recommendation was not to change the bag limits in the Northwest region at all. Leave them like they are. But let's go restudy and see if there's a need to change the boundaries, or make an exception and do something different with that. And guess what? They called one of the scientists up after we all spoke, and I was very impressed with this because this typically doesn't happen. The FWC called one of the scientists back up and says, "Does that make any sense?" And the guy said, "That makes absolutely perfect sense." We'll go look.
They
at
did that when we went in September. Dave Marquette actually brought up trout. It was not on the agenda, and that's why on social media I've been like, "Did you go to the meeting when they're barking?" I'm like, "No." Well, if you ain't went to the meeting, then you can't talk. But if you go to the meeting, I think most people, and I understand that it's far and it's a pain and it's not convenient, but I can tell you from experience of going, the ones that I went to, it's an experience, and you'll understand things a lot more. You have to understand the system and the process. But Dave had brought this up in his recommendation, and they actually called the scientists back up. And at that point, the scientists said, yes, this is on our agenda, but we have not had a chance to actually get the data together because they were going to look at trout. And so they said, we're trying to get our data together so we know what we're doing, but we do see some declines in trout is what they had said.
Yes.
This is back in September.
Yeah.
But here's my theory on the trout. Trout is a fish that we target to kind of keep for our clients.
It is.
Trout don't fight like snook. I mean, if you got snook, redfish, and trout, trout is one of the least fish that you're going to target. So what I think is if they've shut this down, people are going to leave trout completely alone. Where they shut snook down, we still fish for
catch
them.
Yep.
And you mix that with a fish that reproduces on a yearly basis multiple times a year, I think you're going to see trout, if we had just a little closure or bag reduction, you're going to see it catapult to what we used to have.
And I think we will.
That's a good point.
Just people are not going to go after trout. Now think about when trout's open. What happens? You get on a school trout and you're catching 13-inch, 13. I need that 15, 13, 13. Guess what happens? I don't know. Let's just say 1 out of every 5 trout you catch dies. So now you just killed. How many times does that happen? Say you kill 2 trout a trip trying to get a few keepers. Well, you're really keeping the 2 that you killed because they're dead.
Yeah. Now,
So
the recommendation was not to make changes there. The recommendation was to follow all of the other changes at that point. Now, we're going to go back and relook at that. The FWC is going to go back and relook at it. If the numbers stay good for trout, I would recommend the Southwest region because it was actually doing the best out of all of the regions in the state to go ahead and leave it as it is. I will suggest the Southeast coast was probably doing the worst, and I would recommend a bag reduction there.
Yeah.
Longer term than what we've been doing.
to be
One other thing that and there's a caveat here because, and I said this up there and it was received very well. I said no amount of bag changes is going to replace the habitat lost. We have to do something with the habitat. We have to do something with the water flow coming out of Lake Okeechobee and all of the tributaries. We have to do something with that, or we're not going to fix it. We're going to be cutting bag limits down to where you're going to be 0. You're not going to be allowed to catch anything. We can't catch anything because we can't sustain the species.
Let's address some of. So I think there's a lot of I don't know. I try to keep my finger on the pulse on this topic, right? And I know you do too, and we've had some conversations about it on the social media. So, because there seems to be, at least I'm seeing a connection with some of the comments I see out there, or some of the opinions I hear on different radio talk shows. for the Florida guides, was it initiated from the Florida guides that we should close it, or is it something we got on board with?
No, it's something we got on board with. FWC.
And let me just
Yeah.
be clear. I'm asking that, Danny,
Yeah.
because I've directly
Oh.
heard the comments that
Oh, yeah.
the FGA shut this
Yeah,
fishery
I'm-
down.
Believe me, I'm
And I'm sure you're hearing it in your position.
I'm getting.
Yeah,
I'm ready to lock my family up and keep them in the house.
Right.
Because I'm part of the FGA.
which is unreal. You know,
That
part of it
actually-
is a lifetime
actually,
achievement.
yeah.
A winner.
Yeah, no.
But
Staple.
Yeah, staple is more like it, Danny.
the process is the FWC, and they publish this. They make changes to regulations all
Right.
the time. They do. Non-stop. Some
Of
good,
course.
some bad.
We know
some
that.
we agree with, some we don't agree with. But every change they've made since I've been involved,
Mm-hmm.
they've asked for public comment. The Florida Guide Association makes public comment where they see the need.
Yeah.
We were not asked to close the season.
Right. Right.
I didn't.
Your
even
opinion
know.
was not sought, but it was
Yeah,
respected.
yeah.
You know.
Not on trout.
You're right.
The only thing that we were asked about was last year. A lot of us participated in a meeting at the Red Tide.
Right.
And the FWC came in. Florida Guides wasn't. By the way, Florida Guides. I was invited, but Florida Guides was not invited to that
Mhm.
meeting. So I didn't go as a representative of Florida Guides. I went as me. And I think what they were doing and everything was trying to feel us out because they knew they were going to have to close snook and redfish
Right.
because of the red tide. We suggested them closing Tampa Bay because of the undue pressure that it would do it.
Right.
And eventually, and because that red tide was moving north, and as soon as it hit Fort DeSoto, they closed Tampa Bay.
I remember that,
you know,
yep.
and we got very lucky. It didn't come into the bay that
Yeah.
much.
Well-
So we've got some fish there. But no, we did not initiate. We don't
Right.
initiate those changes.
Yeah.
And we made public comment, and whether you agree with the public comments or not, and I've had this conversation. I had this conversation last night. I've had this conversation on social media. That's the process.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't like that process, I'm sorry, but would you rather them not ask for public comment and just do what they
Do what they want.
Do
Yeah.
what they want without
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
This is the way it is.
So yeah, we made public comment. We didn't make public comment on the extended of their executive order to close trout. We made no comment on there whatsoever. Although we agreed with it, we suspected that was going to happen, and I put it in our comments that we would agree to a 1-year closure, but I
Mhm.
did this after the fact.
Right.
Okay, I wanted it to be known. We need to do something because of red tide, whether it's a bag limit change, which we were all for
Mhm.
because of the red tide, or a closure,
Mhm.
which we were all for. So it came out. It's worked out. I think it's going to be good. There were no bag limit changes. Nothing happened there. That's
Mhm.
not going to even be looked at for 3 to 6 months. But there is a closure,
Mm-hmm.
and like it or not,
Th-
Florida Guide feels that was necessary. They commented on it. They didn't close it. They didn't sign the paper. All they did was agreed to it.
Which
And
is the
so-
same.
and so did the CCA.
Which would happen with or without
Yes,
us.
it's CCA that is nothing but recreational fishermen.
Yeah.
They're nothing but
Yeah.
agreed that it needed to be closed.
Right.
But this is the same process. You guys didn't do anything different than me or James or anybody else can go do. You go up there.
Anyone.
Anybody
Anybody.
can
It ain't
do it.
like
No.
this was a closed meeting
No.
to the FGA
Yeah.
and we swayed them to do this.
No.
No, you
Yeah.
go to the public
Co-conspirator or
meeting
something.
Yeah,
and
there were,
yeah.
there
there's a
were-
line of people and you go up there and you talk and you
Plead your case.
Yeah,
plead your
there
case.
were-
You
there
make your
were-
recommendation.
Mhm.
There were offshore fishermen there. There were
Yeah.
Recreational fishermen there. There was a
Right.
mix of people. Autobahns even.
Yeah.
You know.
The stuff
Yeah.
that I've seen over the last 2
Yeah.
weeks on social media is just, it's so dumb that I just laugh. I'm like, it's like a theory. This whole theory is
What-
made up
yeah.
of what actually happened, but nobody was there to know what actually happened.
What you have to realize is that public comment is an important part.
It is
of
very
what-
important.
of
Yeah.
what the FWC wants. Their science is an important part of what to make the decisions. And it's always great when the science and the public comments coincide.
Mm-hmm.
But at some point, you got to make a choice.
Yeah.
At some point, you got to make a choice. And in some cases, they made some recommendations on, and I'll give you an example. Bear hunting, they made recommendations on Goliath grouper years ago.
Yeah.
That and sheephead. The last sheephead bag limit change. The science said differently. And public comments said something else.
Yeah.
So they made the bag. They were going to go down to 5 instead of 15, but they ended up changing. I think it went to 8 sheephead.
Right.
I personally don't agree that they made the decision based off public comment at that point,
Mm-hmm.
because the science would not back it up. So I think they should have left it alone. I'm okay with an 8 bag limit thing, because I don't know 15 sheephead. I
That's
would hate to
ridiculous.
clean 15, but
I hate to clean one.
Yeah. You can't make a decision because Danny Carino doesn't like to clean sheephead.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
But so I disagree with what the FWC did, the process they made to make that decision.
Yeah.
Okay, but you know what? It's not a perfect world.
Well,
It
yeah.
really isn't.
I just think it's important to make that known that this was happening with or without the support of the FGA.
Yeah. That closure was going to happen if I didn't go to Tallahassee or not.
Instead of people,
But I don't. But yeah, and I just think that need to be cleared up. And
well, instead of people harassing people that are doing stuff, maybe you should start thanking them for taking the time to go do stuff. And I think that's where I have a problem with stuff is there's some people in our industry trying to do good on their own dime and their own time, and it gets overlooked by just dumb stuff that's out there, and that bothers me because I'm not even talking about me. I'm talking about other guides. It has been nice in the last 3 years to have guides get back involved in the fishery, not about what you caught yesterday, but the fishery. Like,
right.
because if we don't have fish to catch,
Yeah.
we don't have jobs. People, they're not going to sell boats. It's just you have to protect what we have.
You know what's ironic? This is the same process that we went through in 2010 when we had that cold
Fish kill.
fish kill.
The snook.
And guess what? The snook came back, and a lot of people got behind it. All of a sudden, we're talking about trout, and the majority of people are for it. There are a few out there that are.
I want to comment on Steve, and I know Chapman with Chap Charters. I know him pretty well. We fish a lot of the same areas, bump into each other a lot, and I'm kind of in tune with his opinion on it. It seems like he's somewhere in the middle. You know, like he's not against a closure, but also, sorry,
Oh, that's all right.
wants that availability of that trout species out there to harvest to some degree. And if I'm not mistaken, Stephen, I think he was even in favor of the reduced bag limit. You know, and his comment there says red tide's been going on for years, right?
Yes.
And is this the future of the fishery catch and release?
But red tide has
But red tide severity differs year to year.
They say it's one of the worst in the history.
Yeah, I've lived through red tides my entire life. I mean, there was a time when you couldn't walk down.
Sorry,
you
Steve.
couldn't walk down Bayshore Boulevard because it
Stunk so bad,
Yeah.
right?
So 05 was
but
bad.
I don't recall, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong. I don't recall a red tide lasting 2 years,
Yeah,
and then dump
Through
on
the
top-
winter.
through the winter.
Through the winter, yeah, 2 years. Usually summertime, you had a red tide. It lasted 3, 4, 5 weeks, and it was gone. 2 years in Sarasota Bay lived with this red tide. On top of the red tide, they had that harmful algae bloom that came out of Lake Okeechobee.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So something had to be done, and I believe me, I want to go catch trout. I like catching trout.
And so do my
I
clients.
like
So do all of
eating
our
trout.
clients. Let's be honest that there's no way for us to ignore that this is probably for the outside angler or the traveling person or the tourist coming in. This doesn't do us any favors, right?
No,
Being
there's
honest.
no benefit to
Yeah,
But
us.
that doesn't mean we can't still support
Let
it.
me tell you,
Mhm.
if there are and there are a good number of trout in Tampa Bay.
Yeah.
I won't deny that.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think it's anywhere near it was 4 years ago, but there's a fair number of trout. I am hoping, I'm praying that those trout spawn and some of those trout move to Sarasota Bay.
Sure, for
Repopulate
their
there.
fishery
Yeah,
too.
Yeah, that we're
If
in
nothing else, to
yeah.
stop people from coming here to catch
yeah,
them.
well, what do you do? I mean, we're in
Yeah.
the Southwest region. What do you do?
Yeah.
I mean, do you close everything in the Southwest region except Tampa Bay? Cause
Yeah,
they
you
got
can't
got
do
a
that.
School of trout? No,
You
we're in
can't
the
do that.
Southwest region.
Stephen, the only thing I'd add to that, man, is I totally understand your come from, and I make an effort to try and understand all sides of this situation. And I think the one thing to keep in mind is, A, that, yes, red tide is an annual thing. We've been dealing with it since we've been fishing in Tampa. Everybody knows that. However, we're coming off a really severe red tide and also an exponential increase in people targeting fish in Tampa Bay, especially the inshore species. And
So
I
much
challenge
pressure.
anybody to disagree with that.
There's no
That is
way.
not.
You'll get some challenges, but
There may be, but
but
let's.
yeah, but
there are more
anybody-
people. So when we add an event that severe,
Yeah.
and we increase the number of people targeting it,
and the science is supporting.
and the science is
the
right.
science supported the closure.
Well, we had backlash from 2010 on the
so
snook closure.
in this case, with the FWC, the science supported it, and the public comments supported it.
Yeah.
So
sure.
I'm okay
So
with
Danny,
it.
in your opinion, then is so that to answer the question, and I know Stephen is I know how he thinks. He's not he's not trying to be sarcastic here. I think he's just asking the question for the public here is, do you feel like the future of Tampa Bay fishing is catch and release, or do you feel like this is
absolutely not.
a means to get us to where we need a healthy fishery to be able to support
Absolutely
harvesting?
not.
All right.
And I'll be honest with you. We've been accused of Florida Guys Association wanting to make it a catch and release for everybody. That is so far from the truth. It's laughable.
It's irritating. That's
What
it
we are
is.
doing.
It's detrimental to our business.
What
Mhm.
our recommendations were for, and what I think the FWC is doing, and I think they're following. I don't think the FWC wants to have a closed season.
Mhm.
I think what they want to do is build that fishery up so we can.
Right.
If you look at the spawning potential ratios, you can set those spawning potential ratios to just sustain your fish at
Mhm.
20% or just below 20%.
Yep.
Or make your fish thrive at something over that, so that you have plenty of fish to catch. And that's where we're trying to go.
Yeah.
The science in trout right now, just before the red tide, all indications were the trout were on the decline.
Mm-hmm.
They were not in trouble, but their number in the last 4 years, they
Yeah.
were on the decline.
I did see that, and it'd be great if we get a copy of that, like we did the last one, to be able to share some of those slides with the public, because I noticed that. I mean, the chart just goes down in the last few years, even though it's still overall a healthy
Yeah,
fishery.
overall still a
The
healthy-
trending is bad, and that data I know in that particular graphic is prior to red
just
tide.
prior to
So
red
we're
tide.
talking about a downward spiral or a downward trend
I think
before.
I'm going to put the blame, a little bit
Uh-oh.
of blame on
Uh-oh.
us as charter captains. When you're doing your social media post and you want to get that picture with 10 trout laid down the table, and somebody had a great day and 10 dead trout, you're promoting killing trout. You're promoting killing fish. To me, you're pushing that issue, and in the state we're in now, like where we're at now, I think you want to push fishing, not.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that's bad, but I'm saying where we are now, you're not helping yourself. I tell my customers, like, if you're trying to go do an inshore trip to fill the cooler or justify it with fillets, it's a bad deal.
Stop staring at me like
Yeah.
that.
It's, social media.
Yeah.
And this conversation went on last night also with a
Uh-huh.
friend of mine. When I started guiding,
Yeah.
and it's true everywhere. There was people that couldn't wait to get to the cleaning table. And y'all know I owned a bait shop
Yeah.
at Shell Point. I mean, that was over 20-some years ago.
Mm-hmm.
We had a bait shop, and there were people that were coming in, and they couldn't wait to get to that. They would linger at the.
Well, what's up next? What's up
No,
next?
they'd lay their fish on the table to start cleaning, and wouldn't clean it till somebody came by because they wanted people.
You want to
see
show
See it.
everybody what you
Yeah.
got.
And I understand that. It's an attaboy. It's a man, that's a great catch and everything. at a point we begin calling it at our bait shop. That's the cleaning table mentality.
Mm.
Because there were some people that actually got obnoxious with what they were trying to do. And then, like the guy that sat there for 30 minutes and waited somebody to come up just so he could clean this redfish he caught. And then the daggone redfish wasn't but 19 inches.
Yeah.
So
He's air temperature now.
yeah, and what we've done now is we've moved that to social media.
Yeah.
It's look what I caught, here's
Sure.
what I got. And that's okay.
Yeah.
But after you've done it for a while, and especially the number of years I've done it for, I mean, social media is okay to do what you want to do. It's a great way to advertise and promote your business.
Yeah.
I'm lucky enough I don't have to.
You are.
Yeah. What I do with social media is, I'll share a picture here and there. I don't go overboard. I don't take a picture every day of what I catch.
Yeah.
What I do is for my customers, and if they happen to, and it could be a 18-inch snook, but if it's the first snook the guy caught,
Yeah.
I take a picture.
It's a moment.
Yeah,
It's a great moment.
If it's a 36-inch snook and it's the biggest fish we've caught the year,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I'll probably take a picture of that.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what? If I'm catching 20 or 30 or 40 22-inch snook, I'm not going to take it. I'm not going to take that picture. And if you see some of my posts, you'll read, yeah, we had a good snook day, or we had a good week.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't need that attaboy thing anymore.
Yeah.
And if you want to do it, that's fine. And I certainly don't care. But do people want to really know that you caught 500 20-inch snook this week?
Yeah.
Or do they know it? I mean, you go out there, you do it every day, you catch fish.
There's the marketing
It's okay.
side of it when you look at it.
Personal best there.
Yeah.
Personal
He went
best.
fishing with me last week.
Yeah.
Oh.
And we hit some personal bests.
Yeah, and those are the things to get
Yeah,
excited. Those are the
absolutely.
things to celebrate.
Yeah.
That's
Well, I guess what I'm saying is the fillet table shot is misleading. I typically I do social media, and social media can be aggravating, but it's also rewarding, and you can also benefit from it.
In my opinion, it's how the business. You asked the question. I don't know how our fishery supports it. It's probably social media.
Yeah.
It's probably social media driving that.
It has definitely changed. I'm
Well,
one of the
experience, not tenure.
older guys now, and I've
Hey,
seen
hey, Shane.
the change develop, and that's okay because we have watched probably, and you've been doing it 5 years longer than me, and I got 15 in, and I've seen about 3 changes.
Mm-hmm.
We went from the forums to now social media.
Oh, yeah. The forums was
Before it was magazines.
Yeah.
The big difference that I notice now is you used to do stuff. You would work hard at building your name to get reputable guys to ask you to do that TV show or get that article written on you, and you worked real hard to get to there. And now it's just let me go figure out how to get 40,000.
It's an email and a
Instagram.
password away.
Right.
And
So
you know
that's
what?
the difference, and that's okay. That's the way it is. It's
Jason,
just
you and
different.
I have known each other for a long time.
Turn
And
that around for.
You know the way to get business. The way I get business.
Mhm.
Do a good job.
Do the best you can. That's all you can do.
Yeah, it's a different day and age we live in, and that's okay. We have to adjust. I benefit from social media, not as much as some, but I would say that what I have learned is that from a marketing standpoint is people say, I don't want to do it. I said, well, I kind of say that some days, but then I think about it. You want to put yourself out there like on a regular basis.
You need your name known.
Yeah, and it's an easy way. It surprises me sometimes. I had a conversation with one of the sponsor guys, and they're like, "Yeah, we saw this. Yeah, we saw that." And I'm like, "Really, you did?"
Mm-hmm.
And then my light goes off in my head. Okay, I need to, because sometimes I get irritated with it. What I've kind of figured out with social media, you have to treat it like life, and it's very hard.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You have to block out the negativity. And
Oh, easy,
concentrate
yeah.
on the good.
Well,
It is hard to do that sometimes because you
What-
get notifications and
depends on what you want from it, you
What
know.
has bothered me through this whole process
Mhm.
this time more than any other time, and it's all been on social media. The Florida guides had an opinion. I personally have an opinion. Other people have an opinion.
Done. Camera's done.
All right. Just wrap it up with
Okay,
this
I'll
comment.
wrap it
Yep.
You know, I have my opinion. I value my opinion. I value other people's opinion, whether they agree with me or not.
Yep.
But people have gotten downright ugly on social media.
I've seen it.
And it trashed me and my family.
That's uncalled
people
for.
go over.
That just doesn't
the
need to be.
Keyboard warriors go overboard. Guys, our camera went dead. We had issues tonight.
It ran longer than the hour we usually go. So long
we started
episode.
late, the whole 9 yards. Guys, don't forget, follow our YouTube page. We're trying to push it. We didn't try to not do Facebook. Facebook wouldn't let us.
YouTube's just more reliable. So.
Yeah, exactly. So.
But Danny, man, thanks for coming on and
Danny,
sharing
thank
that.
you.
That's good info. And really just thank you on behalf of, I would say, the Tampa Bay angler.
Thank you for
throughout this,
for
you
your
haven't
time.
gotten enough credit for devoting your time to
More
being a
got
part
criticized.
of the future of our fishery. Yeah, you've been getting more of a beatdown than you have a handshake.
Yeah, I have.
And I think the handshakes
But I've
deserved.
also, I've also had some good comments from
Good, man. You deserve it. And, thanks for coming on our show again.
Yeah, and guys, thanks for tuning in. Next week, I won't be here for a few weeks. My daughter's got AAU championships, and I got to go get her to practice. So you guys going to be covering me, but y'all will be in good hands with the crew.
At least look at the one camera that's still on
Yeah.
while you're saying it.
Until next week, tight lines and catch them up.
Yep. See ya.